is the narrative around rotation around Christmas overplayed, or is there kind of data to back up the fact that we should be almost a bit conservative with our transfers through this period? We should be buying players who are pretty much nailed.
Yeah, look, they're valid concerns. Clubs are well aware of the fixture schedule and they will plan accordingly with regards to rotation. So look, yeah, when you're thinking about those players in games played in close proximity, I'm thinking primarily of the games on Boxing Day fixtures. I think that's game week 19. Then you're followed quickly in game week 20, which is, I think, round about 48 to 72 hours for clubs, and then straight into New Year's Day, then you will see heavy rotation. And what we've seen in the past is, inherently teams will sort of make on average around about 2 to 3 additional rotations in and around those games, as typically as you always would. And if it doesn't happen from game week 19 to 20, then it certainly will happen on New Year's Day. And for me, what you're trying to do, you're trying to mitigate that risk in terms of, one, players picking up injuries, because we know that the increased minutes will increase the risk of injury incidents, and two, you want to minimize the risk of your players being rotated out of the squad or rested altogether.
And so, Lynn, is this affecting the way that you're going to do transfers then? Because kind of up until this point of the season, it's been get the best players in, maybe take punts for a few game weeks. But is the kind of shift in mentality now towards longevity? Get players in who are good, obviously still with some good data and things like that, but maybe not the most exciting prospects, but people that we know are going to be nailed through that festive period. Is that maybe a shift in mentality that you're considering?
It's definitely something people should consider, but it's not for me. I've learned through this pandemic that I need to have a strong bench, and that's something I want to continue with. So I think go for the hot ones and keep a good bench.
Well, there you go. I mean, the interesting thing is as well is I think there is emerging a lot of good, cheaper assets that might enable you to have the strong bench, but also have a good starting 11. I mean, kind of looking at your team then, Lynn, are there any players that kind of concern you that might have minutes managed over this festive period? Say if, somebody came more into form that is a bigger rotation risk, would you avoid getting them in because of that? Say if Aspilicueta suddenly starting, was in really good form, he almost went into Reece James form. Would you say I wouldn't get him? Or maybe a better one is a Manchester City asset. We know how much Pep likes to rotate anyway. You throw in the Christmas worries. Would that make you adverse to maybe bringing in an in-form player?
I definitely think it is something you need to keep in mind, and you need to look at your team as a whole. Do you have a lot of these players, or do you have 1, 2? If you've got 1 or 2, you can definitely survive. But if you're looking at, you've got Cancelo, you've got Aspilicueta, you've got Rudiger, you've got all of them, then maybe bring in someone who is likely to play 90 minutes all the games.
And Ben, this is something that, we've talked about for a number of years now. We've been doing this for a while. Does this factor into your thinking, especially because of COVID, because of the differing pre-season that a lot of people have had? Because you've always kind of maintained that your biggest worry is getting a starting 11 out there. That's the first and foremost thing. And sometimes for you, I've almost asked a loaded question for Lynn there based on the way that you like to play, Ben, which is maybe not so much about the form or the fixtures, but making sure that you've got an 11 out there. Do you think that is the overarching thing that will decide your transfers over the next month and so?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, usual suspects, the Chelseas, the Manchester Cities, in essence, they've got 2 first 11 squads, players more than capable of coming straight in and rotating heavily. And if I own a premium asset, then I want to try and ensure that that premium asset is starting or is in a prime position to start. I'm not really prepared to take a risk on those high-end players. I want some sort of guarantee. So I will do whatever I can to try and mitigate that risk and maybe look to go maybe somewhere a little bit safer. Like I say, I touched upon Chelsea, Man City. Concerns for me or red flags would be players like Mikel Antonio. We know where his problems. He will be managed. And if it's not, even if he does start in games, we're talking about restricted minutes. There's, I think maybe, or Watford, if any of those assets are appealed, we know what Claudio Ranieri done last time he was in the Premier League. Heavy rotation, the original, the OG, Tinkerman. Manchester United, Ollie, there's lots of options in there for him as well, if his squad stays more or less fit. So I think, look, you need to be looking at those fixtures, seeing how the schedule pans out. And for me, I'll be looking to plan certainly around those. And I'll, at the cost of maybe missing out on one or two City assets over that period, I'd probably, stick with somebody like Edison, as is the only player that you could categorically state, although I think it was last year he contracted COVID. But in terms of, being fit and available, Edison would probably be the only player on that City team that you would hang your hat on and say, he's starting.
And just kind of continuing there then, Ben, a lot of people worry about the older players in the league. You've mentioned Antonio. He's not particularly like old in comparison to some of the other veterans in there, but he's had his injury problems. But the big one for me that I'm kind of thinking about in my team is Jamie Vardy, but then also because he has a good run of fixtures, Cristiano Ronaldo. Now, we've done some number crunching before the season started on the likes of Ronaldo. He's usually quite robust. He usually plays most of the games. But it's different this time around because he's been in leagues that do have a winter break, a bit earlier. They don't have it so compact over the Christmas time. So do you think that maybe Ronaldo and maybe Jamie Vardy could be players that might be rested a lot more than others in the team, even though they're talisman?
Look, absolutely. What you don't want to do is take any unnecessary risk. And we know that players, as they, reach the twilight years of their career, as he put it, it takes longer for them to recover. Inherently, these players are carrying knocks and niggles, and it does take them, a little bit longer to get back to where they need to be to start games. And when we talk about this fixture schedule, one of the things that we always reference is that inherent increased risk of injury. But ultimately as well, what the research will tell us is optimally, players are not ready to perform at their best in games which have that such quick turnaround. So the likes of the Vardys and the Ronaldos, even if they are selected, are they going to be, bringing their A game to a particular fixture if they've just played 48 hours beforehand? And, the evidence and the research would suggest probably not.